Good afternoon. On behalf of the Public Relations Society of America, Counselors to Higher Education section, I want to welcome you to this Google Hangout on Air with Executive Level Communicators, Part 1. As most of you are aware, we had to reschedule our January Hangout because of technical difficulties. But as effective communicators, when we experience a fumble, we pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, get back in the game. My name is Dana Fair. I'm the lead communication strategist for the Office of the Chief Information Officer at the University of Michigan. I'm a member of the Counselors to Higher Education, or as we like to say, CHE, Executive Committee, and I'll be your host today. Before we begin, I want to invite you to the CHE 2014 Senior Summit, taking place April 9th through 11th in Washington, D.C. Executive and senior level communicators from across the nation gather to hear presentations, network with colleagues, and discover new strategies for making an impact on their campuses. Today is the last day to save $100 in registration. For more information, visit the PRSA website. In the search box, type in Senior Summit. We hope to see you there. Now, here's the outline for today's discussion. I will ask the panelists questions during the first half of the Hangout, and they'll take turns sharing insights. For the second half of our program, I will ask questions you provide. You can submit your questions in the Hangout or on our Google Plus page. You can also tweet them using hashtag CHE Hangout. That's hashtag CHE Hangout. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce you to our panelists. You can read their full bios on the CHE Facebook page. Lisa Ann Lapin is Associate Vice President for University Communications at Stanford University. Michael Schoenfeld is the Vice President for Public Affairs and Government Relations at Duke University. And Joseph Brennan is the Vice President for Strategic Communication at the University of Iowa. Joe is also the newly appointed chair of the CHE Executive Committee. For those watching, I'd like to provide context for today's discussion. Higher education is in a time of disruptive change. The public is questioning the value of university degrees in the face of rising costs and uncertain employment opportunities for graduates. Globalization is affecting how institutions think about almost anything. Our panelists have the unique perspective of advising their presidents and institutional leaders on how to navigate this environment from a communications perspective. This is no easy task, but inquiring minds want to know, which leads me to my first question. Given the environment, what do you recognize are higher education's most significant strategic communications challenges? And Lisa, we'll start with you.
I see three different challenges, major challenges for strategic communications, but really for all of higher education. The first is that we're being asked to rethink our core business. Everything from online learning and new technology to how we deliver education, to the costs of our tuition, how we use tuition, and the value proposition of what our graduates receive for their investment in their college education. On top of that, we have public and government assaults on higher education. We're being accused of having high costs. We're being accused of not having enough aid, requiring students to take out too many loans, and not providing an education that allows them to quickly enter the job market. So we're in a really challenging public place. There's a documentary that was recently screened at the Sundance Film Festival called Ivory Tower. It will probably be distributed in a broad way of this summer and fall. And the very fact that it's called Ivory Tower plays into this public perception right now that higher education isn't doing a good job. And that's a huge challenge from the communication side. The third thing that I see is globalization. Keeping up with what the rest of the world is doing, the expectations of the rest of the world, the interest of the rest of the world, and the fact that we have many students from across the world coming to our campuses now. We're also trying to reach out to them. There are opportunities there, but also challenges. And on the communication side, globalization is, at least here at Stanford, something that we're really grappling with right now.
Michael.
Well, I will try to give a different variation on the things that Lisa mentioned, because I think those are indeed the critical issues for us. First, there's the significantly diminished trust and respect for institutions. We are, as universities, we are among the most respected and the most well-known and the highest esteemed institutions in the country, and yet there is still significant distrust in institutions in general. We are the victims of that. Some of it we've brought upon ourselves. Some of it has been part of perhaps a more concerted political effort, and some of it is just the natural distrust in institutions. Second, I do want to call out the cost issue. The cost of higher education has become one of the most intense national political issues. It's probably, if it hasn't eclipsed healthcare, it's certainly quite right up there in intensity of feeling among voters. So you are going to see, we saw every day there is some politician, federal, state, and local, or local, making some comment and some suggestion about how higher education has gotten too costly. There's a lot of anxiety and a lot of anger out there in the public about the cost of college, what it takes to send your children and their children through college. That in turn is deteriorating the respect and esteem that our institutions have. Third, we have to continue to demonstrate the value of higher education, and that value proposition has a pretty broad spectrum from vocational and technical education all the way up to the research universities and everything in between. Demonstrating the value as something that is more complete and more comprehensive than just the starting salary of your graduates is a very big challenge, especially when you're facing a very strong headwind in the other direction that's demanding a return on investment, an immediate return on investment. And then finally, as international institutions, certainly the three of us or the four of us on this Hangout are institutions that have a significant number of international partnerships and relationships. So, as Lisa said, globalization is one form of globalization in our education, is one form of what we need to do and need to do better at. We also have the challenge of establishing our brands and establishing and protecting our reputations outside the United States. And in a world in which we all know, and it's become cliche, in a world in which information travels instantaneously, and in which there are more competitors than ever for the attention and the time of people when it comes to education. We're not just competing against each other, we're competing against and with corporate education, we're competing with MOOCs, we're competing with the Khan Academy, we're competing with Wikipedia, we're competing with Netflix, we're competing with local universities. So the amount of noise out there and the difficulty it takes to get through that noise is increasing exponentially.
All right. Joe, you're up next.
I agree with everything that we heard from Lisa and Michael. Increasing competition, globalization, a great loss of trust in our institutions, and this pervasive economic anxiety that seems to be the hallmark of our age. It occurs to me that behind each of those megatrends that are producing all this disruption for us is the pervasive use of personal communication technology. So I'm going to add to this that what else is going on here is that we live in a time in which the control over meaning making has shifted away from traditional institutional authorities, governments, universities, churches, publishing houses, and has shifted into the hands of ordinary people. And this force itself is behind much of the other forces that are truly disrupting the industry.
All right. So my next question. How have you responded to these challenges? And Lisa, once again, we're going to start with you.
So We are trying to tackle things one or two messages at a time. Here at Stanford, the two top issues for us this year in 2014 are the importance of the humanities to a broad education. That's helping us with the value message as well, because we're trying to emphasize the fact that students who don't just major in engineering but also major in creative pursuits or major in classics might be equally successful in the workplace. We're using lots of spokespeople, people in the tech industry who had majors within the humanities who can talk about how it contributed to their success. And it allows us to reinforce the fact that our graduates, regardless of what their major was, are going on to successful careers, and that the value added by a university education is in intellectual capacity. It's in the ability to be the global citizen, and it's also in the ability to be flexible when you go out into the world, because our graduates are going to have more opportunities, but they're also going to change careers more frequently than any generation that came before. And we are preparing them for that, and a university education is a good value and in preparing them for the future in a very complicated world. Our second major message of the coming year, our strategic message, is about cost. And we happen to be a high aid institution, but we find that people don't perceive us that way, and they still perceive a Stanford education as very, very expensive and inaccessible. So we are doing lots of outreach about what is true cost, and what is financial aid, and what might be the availability of aid. And we're trying to do broad education about financial aid generally, not just at Stanford, but to just raise awareness, particularly among certain populations, that aid is available to them and that they are likely to be able to go to college at a lower cost than they really believe. We've done some videos to this effect. And so we think by focusing on a couple of core messages where we might be more successful at being heard. But we're also doing other things to the point about technology. The mobile space is an increasing challenge for us. We are building responsive websites. We're building compliant websites. We're trying to do much more with video. Video has become the very accessible way that people communicate. It spreads virally. There was an announcement we made yesterday about the origins of the universe, and we have a video as part of that announcement where we were trying to humanize this really very complex discovery of the origins of the universe. And that video, as we sit here right now, is approaching 1 million views within 24 hours. So the power of communicating in digital spaces and in new mediums is ever increasing. This is a record for us. Almost a million views in 24 hours shows the power of the medium, and I can't emphasize enough the power of video.
All right. Michael.
So before I answer, I have to give a shout out to Lisa and her team for that video, which at least 3 people sent to me this morning with a, "Did you see this? This is really cool." So whatever you were trying to do, it worked. I would say in general, and as senior communicators and as people who we hope are at least setting some pace for folks, there are 3 or 4 or 5 things that we're doing in general to address the issues. One is constantly looking at our language and speaking our language. It's very easy for us to be inside the higher education, the university bubble, and speak in the kind of language that we understand and the kind of shorthand that we understand, but that can be either mystifying or in some cases infuriating to people outside. So speaking the language and taking great care to pay attention not to what we want to say, but to what people hear. and to how they understand and intuit and digest and absorb our messages and through those mediums. So it sounds like a very simple task because we're all educators at some level and we're all working with very intelligent people, and sometimes that becomes an even greater challenge with educated, intelligent people. Second is to constantly look at our organization and structure and make sure to the extent possible that we're organized and structured not for yesterday's challenges but for tomorrow's challenges. We're a highly decentralized institution like many other large research universities, and that builds in a lot of capacity. It also oftentimes builds in a lot of redundancy and autonomy. How we can best harvest and coordinate and collaborate internally is and will be a very strong signal to those outside about how strong we can make our communications programs. Third is to, and it sounds utterly cliche, is to embrace innovation, whether it's in the technology space, in the mobile space, in organization, in messages and creativity, embracing innovation and not being afraid to fail. We have the ability now through social media and digital media. We can do things at very low cost. We can try things at very low cost. If they don't work, then they don't work. It's not like you're publishing 100,000 view books and you say, I don't think that was such a good idea. If it's in the digital space, surely there's a cost to it, but you can make some changes. And then finally, thinking of ourselves as content producers and providers. I think we all say that, and we all do that, and we all practice that. That, however, is something that needs to continue to be infused inside our institutions. That we're not simply, as communicators and communications offices, we're not simply conduits to the New York Times or to CNN, but in fact, we have the ability. And we have the resources, and we certainly have the content to produce exactly what's on in all of those other spaces and reach. Let's not forget the exact same number of people that any other online digital media outlet is doing it, and we can do it with really high quality content, really interesting content, and with some of the most powerful brand names on the planet. So, reorienting ourselves as publishers. And not as middlemen for a transaction is it sounds good, we all do it, but it is a constant process of education.
So, Joe, before you answer, let me say, if you see me look off screen, it's because I'm looking to see the questions that are coming in. Just want to remind everyone that they can submit their questions in the Hangout on the Google Plus page or by tweeting them using CHE Hangout. Joe, if you'd like to take a swing at that question.
Thanks, Dana. I think, like Lisa and her colleagues at Stanford, we're focusing on getting back in control over the narratives that are being constructed about our institution. As a public university, we have less overt anxiety from many of our stakeholders about cost, although it's there. It comes across in maybe a different way. What we're focusing on is reminding people of two things: of the academic quality of the University of Iowa and of what it means for Iowa and the surrounding region to be home to a major public research university like us. The impact that creates in a whole host of aspects such as economics, healthcare, better futures for young people, culture, the arts, and quality of life. And Michael, you usefully remind us that we need to innovate and that we have tremendous content generation opportunities. I agree 100%. I think as leaders, one message that I think we need to keep bringing back to our staff is the idea that we have to respond much more quickly and nimbly than we ever had in the past, because the pace is so much faster that we need to be able to detect what's happening and respond to it. And I'm taking a little different approach maybe than what you're taking at Duke, in that we are re-embracing the traditional PR role of working with earned media and journalists to try to place stories. We're doing that because we can leverage their audiences, but also the credibility that they imply. And then we take it one step further. Earned media coverage and reflected back into the conversations. Because a great deal of effort on my campus is going into generating the kind of social media relationships that allow there to be conversations about us. Not conversations that we dictate, but rather ones that we guide, the rooms that we open and invite others to come in and talk with and about us. So I think if we learn in our field to blend the traditional role of earned media with the new role of social media, I think that is very promising for future directions.
So, Dana, if I could just jump in, Joe, I completely concur, and certainly would never want to leave the impression that we're substituting one for the other, and that, of course, becomes our resource challenge, because for a whole lot of reasons, including the what you describe as your excellent strategy there, but also because of the credibility that earned media provides and is demanded by from our faculty. And our constituents, we absolutely have to do all of that, and we have to do it. Again, we talk about challenges for senior communicators. The three of us have to figure out how we juggle the resources, the time, the mind share, and everything else to do all of that and then some.
You know, Michael, I think you're so spot on with that. What struck me was you said we have to do all of it. And my sense is that everybody that's participating in the Hangout and listening to us today is feeling the same pressure.
Yep.
So here's a question that many of us have, and that is, many of us don't have the ear of the presidents of our institutions or the leaders in our institutions. And so my third question is, for communicators, for senior communicators, we need to have an impact at their institutions. What do you recommend we do or avoid doing? Again, we want to have that impact. So, right, we want to know, again, what to do, what not to do. Lisa.
So, going back to Mike's point about that we are our own publishers, I've made that impression on I have a kind of a standing talk that I give to every administrator that will listen about the fact that we get more coverage and more eyeballs on our content when we produce it ourselves and on our own platforms. And just a recent presentation to our budget committee, I went through the numbers of people who see tweets, people who see our content on Facebook, people who share our content via Reddit and other kinds of platforms, and it's the content that we generate, and to impress upon them that we can't rely on the New York Times anymore to convey and to tell our stories for us. We have to tell them ourselves. And I'm slowly, I think, starting to get through and making the case for resources, helping them understand that we have to operate in a digital space. So more than ever, I think we need to be advocates for multi-platform communication, for investment in digital resources, digital resource talent, computer programmers. As Mike said, we need to be willing to innovate and experiment, but we also need the resources that allow us to do that. So it's about slowly making the case. And I'm hoping, for example, that our video today will help me. I will use that to make the case about the support for more videographers. And we do need to be willing to experiment and not become complacent. And we need to make sure that we're supporting communication across lots of different platforms. Multi-platform and multimedia communication is critical to getting the message out. And sometimes you can think it's costly, and it's not necessarily so expensive. I've had people say, well, I can't afford somebody to do Twitter. If you can afford some student interns, you can do Twitter. You can find the resources, and Facebook isn't costly either. It's a matter of taking that one nugget, that one great narrative that you have, and telling it in multiple places. for taking the one video you are able to produce and making sure lots of eyeballs get to that content, and picking your battles and picking the few stories. If you have fewer resources, pick the most strategic stories to tell, the ones that solve some of those big picture umbrella issues that we talked about at the outset.
Michael?
Well, again, I concur with all of that, and I would just add three things for senior communicators, whether they've got the ear of the president or not. First is to understand the issues and the environment. We operate in a very complex world, and our institutions, if you're at a research university with a medical center, every part of the human experience from birth to death happens on your campus every day, multiple times a day. They're enormously complex. And it's your job, it's our job, to understand and be able to speak about as much of that as possible. It's really important to know the issues, what's happening in higher education, not just what's happening at your institution or in your town or in your athletic conference, but what's happening in higher education, what's happening around the world, what's happening in the spaces that we're in. Be insatiably and enormously curious. Somebody, when I first started working at a university, said the best way to understand how the university works is and to work with faculty is just to ask them a very simple question whenever you meet a new person. What are you working on? And we should know what those people are working on. Second, I feel strongly that if we're as senior communicators, that we have to immerse ourselves in the mission of the university. We have to be ambassadors. We're on display. We need to be ambassadors. We need to be enthusiastic. We need to be skeptical as appropriate, and truth tellers as appropriate. But we really need to embrace and immerse ourselves in the institution. And that means getting to know students and working with students, getting to know faculty and working with faculty, getting to know alumni and working with alumni. The days of the sort of the mercenary PR office where there's a bunch of people in there writing press releases, that may work somewhere, but I can tell you, you're not going to be successful if you're not completely immersed in the mission and the goals and the intellectual environment that is surround you. And then third, we can, as Lisa said, we can demonstrate our value too by creating and looking for partnerships inside the university, outside the university, working with our internal constituents on programs and activities, working outside the university with organizations in our community, working among universities. Joe and Lisa and I are part of a consortium called Futurity, which is and Michigan as well, which is a consortium, a very ad hoc consortium of universities that shares content in the research space. Those are the kinds of things that not only we can do, but we absolutely have to do, and they'll be expected of us in the future.
All right, Joe.
Thanks, Dana. We've heard some great thoughts here. I think the only thing I would add is, if you want to increase your influence, do these things. First, develop an understanding of the university as an enterprise. Where does it gain its revenue? What are its major cost drivers? What is the operating context, both externally and internally? Really be a master of that. In other words, gain a view of the university that is similar to the view that a president, provost, chief financial officer would have. The second thing is, learn to become a very good planner. Regardless of whatever level you're on, in a department, a college, or at an institutional level, learn the knack of developing strategic communication plans. Plans that take business objectives, turn them into good communication strategy, and then give you something that you can execute against. And finally, use the metrics. Gather the data about the outcome and impact of your communication activities and bring that back with people. Of course, letting them know when things work, but don't shy away from saying, here's what we learned. We tried this, it didn't work as well as we wanted to. This is what we can do in the future. I think those three things are going to position you in people's minds much more as an executive and much less, as my colleagues have pointed out, The people who write press releases are the people that worry about what the headline is in the paper. Doing those things will break us out of the tactical telegram office model and put us into a counseling role and get you a seat at the table.
Excellent. So I've been looking at some of the questions that are coming in. So I'm not going to put Lisa on the hot seat. So Lisa, you don't have to take the first question. So let's start with one. It has to do with costs. Any suggestions on how to demonstrate to senior leaders, including trustees, that cost is a major issue in the eyes of students and parents? There seems to be some denial on many campuses.
Well, I'll jump in there. I think that I would take issue with that, at least in my experience at two private research universities. In fact, just the opposite. Costs are very much on the mind of our trustees and senior leaders, but they're also trying to balance that with excellence and with quality. And with the increasing number of demands on the institution. So, for instance, it's very easy for people to say we have too many, services for students, or we have too many, frills for our students, until there's a serious incident on your campus in which somebody discovers that you didn't have enough mental health counseling, or you didn't have enough security, or you didn't have enough fill in the blank. So I think the idea of cost is one where there's an awful lot of there are a lot of contradictions. Our students and parents want and demand as wide and as comprehensive a range of services as can be imagined. They also want and demand, understandably, for those services to be delivered efficiently, and they want the institution to acknowledge and that there is tremendous sacrifice that's taking place to send students to our institution. So I don't think there's a straightforward linear answer to the cost issue, and I've seen a lot of polling data that really points out these inherent contradictions in the way people think about what higher education costs, what they think it costs, what it actually costs, what it takes to go there.
I'll jump in. If you're trying to convince trustees that this is a concern, I can see that some trustees might not understand it or be experiencing it directly. How could you convince them that it's a problem? I would imagine that your financial aid office gets lots of questions. You could talk to your financial aid director about the types of questions your own applicants and their families are asking about cost. I bet they're flooded. I also think that there's a lot out in the media about cost. One thing that we do is put together a set of clips for our board weekly on higher education issues. We're constantly educating our board and the university leadership. And our president and provost follow things very closely, but our board members are business people and often very busy. So we put together a packet for them every week of the issues we want them to understand. And cost is constantly in the news. We also have done some public opinion polling that shows that this is really one of our #1 public perception problems. And when we show them, the trustees, that polling data, it's pretty convincing. So I think you have a lot of potential tools at your disposal to make the case that cost is truly an issue. And then about the messaging, I think it's telling lots of stories about the availability of aid, the availability of access to education at lower costs, and helping people understand that it's not something they need to be afraid of. I'm the parent of a high school senior right now, and I can say with it firsthand, it's what every parent talks about. How are they going to do it? And so I do think people are eager for information, and the more clarity you can provide. Financial aid calculators on your websites, videos where you have students talking about how they were able to get scholarships and able to get through school, even if they didn't initially think they could afford it. There are lots of great stories to tell.
I would just add that there are absolutely great stories to tell, but we shouldn't. We all remember that Lisa and I are work at institutions that cost $60,000 a year. Now, we could talk a lot about financial aid and about affordability and access, but our public opinion data shows that people just simply don't believe that something that costs $60,000 a year is affordable. And that drives, I will say, that drives our leadership and our trustees crazy, because they rightly say we are busting our butts to raise money for financial aid, to enhance our aid practices and programs. How come that message isn't getting out? And I would argue that the message is getting out, but it is a very, very steep, at least for certain kinds of institutions, it is a very, very steep mountain to climb. We're not giving up. We're not throwing in the towel. We're doubling down, but we should all recognize the challenge.
And if anybody's interested, you want to go to the Stanford YouTube channel, we have a financial aid cost video there. We've been using it and rolling it out everywhere from our visitor center. We show it before tours for applicants. We've had it on the website several times, used it in social media, and it sits on our financial aid page as well. So if anyone wants to take a look, you're welcome.
And I'm going to cut before I suck all the air out of the room. Let me also refer you to the NPR Planet Money site. Those of you who are familiar with the business program Planet Money, we worked with them a couple of weeks ago on a series of programs and podcasts about why college costs as much as it does. And I thought they did an little incomplete, but an excellent job of producing a couple of radio pieces and then some graphics that explain just what it costs how much it costs to deliver the kind of education that we do, that we provide. So I think it's planetmoney.com, or you can get to it from the NPR site as well.
NPR Planet Money.
NPR Planet Money. Yep.
If I could just jump in here. Those are great resources. I also have referred people to the opinion editorial piece that was co-authored by Lisa, by your provost, John Etchemendy, back in January, that debunks some of the myths that are being perpetrated in the media right now. I would also tell people to go look at the Michigan State University College of Education. The dean of that institution is a respected researcher who looks at the college cost problem from a research perspective, and I think has helpful information. And just to answer the person who asked the question, it's I think a little amazing to many of us that your board members don't perceive cost as an issue. I would just second what Lisa said. Many folks on boards are busy business people, and we need to communicate with them the way executives want to be communicated with. Sort of charts, graphs, infographics, short bullet points. Perhaps that would help.
Thank you. So the next question, it's about branding. Is it possible that colleges and universities are vulnerable to political attacks and public anger because they haven't established strong brands that would inoculate them against those attacks? How difficult is it to effectively brand a large research university that has many business lines and constituencies?
Well, that's a really provocative and great question. I don't think that the challenges that we're seeing right now are really because our brands are not strong. I think, in fact, many of us have some of the strongest brands in the country, if not the world. But perhaps the challenge is that concepts that are conveyed in those brands are not spot on about impact and value. Many institutions' brands are heavily driven, for example, by their sports identities. We're going to see that again as we get into March Madness here. I wonder if we need to spend more time reminding people of the value of the investment that's being made and somehow consciously developing that into our core messaging.
Yeah, I agree with Joe. I don't think the problem is a lack of brand or a lack of strength of the brand. I think it is more around what that brand signifies, and it signifies the things that are not necessarily related to some of the political attacks or whatever we want to call them that we're getting. So if anything, we probably have a reservoir of goodwill and a reservoir of value in our brands that could be deployed in different and maybe even in better ways. We're in an environment that we haven't had that we haven't really faced before, and I think one of our options is to figure out just how to use the power of our brands.
Now, I would say, when we do the little bit of public opinion polling we do think that Stanford has a great, well-known name brand, but public perception of what that brand is doesn't necessarily coincide with what we think it is. And they look at our brand as somewhat elite. Everybody's an entrepreneur, and everybody's going to sell a company for $1 billion. And we're not happy with that, and we don't think that does get at the value of what we provide, which is why we're working so hard on the humanities messages and the value of this comprehensive liberal arts education that a university like ours is able to provide, and why future workers need this education. Right now, that's not part of the public perception of our brand. So I would agree we could do a better job. But I do want to raise one question, which is the fact that while I think our higher education brands are under attack in the United States, I do think that internationally, the brand of American higher education is it. We are the envy of the world. Our higher education institutions, our higher education systems. Why is that? Why does the rest of the world want an American college education, and why within our own country are we fighting the perceptions we're fighting? There's clearly a part of the world that sees great value in what we provide. Maybe there's a lesson for us there. What do they see internationally that our audiences aren't seeing domestically?
And I have a related question. So then how do you take your brands globally? That's a challenge for many campuses. I'm curious what each of you might be doing to do that.
Well, okay, I'll spare Lisa. I think this is one area where we have to do a lot. Before I answer your question, Dana, I think we have to say this is an area where we have to do a lot of education on our campuses, because we tend sometimes to respond to the stimulus, and the stimulus may be a president or a provost or a professor who goes to a particular country and comes back and says, I was just in Bulgaria and nobody knows who we are in Bulgaria, or fill in the blank. And we all face this. And a good metric that I remind our leadership of and our faculty, that if you look at the single most recognizable brand name in the world, Coca-Cola, the brand name that is more widely known than anything else, or at least at the moment, Coca-Cola spends on the order of $7 billion a year worldwide burnishing the most recognized brand name in the world. So there's a matter of resources and spending and upkeep on developing and maintaining those global brands that we're never going to match. So we have to be strategic. We have to take advantage of opportunities that get presented to ourselves. We have to be regionally focused, and we have to be realistic about what it means to be an American higher education brand outside the United States. And we've had success focusing on those areas, those parts of the world, and those particular disciplines and areas that we've identified as priorities, and not try to be Coca-Cola and have ourselves be recognized everywhere all the time at the same level of intensity, and that takes time, but it's a worthwhile investment.
Our international alumni would like to see much more of Stanford in their countries. They'd like to see us be much more visible. We're, as an institution, frankly, we're strategically a little bit torn about how well known we want to be in parts of the world. There's only so much space. We're actually not a huge institution. For undergraduates, we've got 6,000 undergraduates. We're relatively small, and we can't take lots of international applications, even for our graduate programs. So we aren't seeking lots of international applicants. What we are seeking is understanding of Stanford's value and contributions and Stanford's research globally. And that has been hard. I mean, we try to take advantage of opportunities when we have faculty members or administrators in certain countries. We're also trying to help our United States community understand why Stanford has programs abroad. And most critically for us, the global message we want to send is that it's important for our students and our graduates to be global citizens. So we want them to have some international exposure in their time here. Study abroad is really critical, big component of what we do, helping students really understand what's going on around the world. We have centers in many parts of the world, and I suppose that's the biggest way we're spreading our brand. We have a center in Peking University that will be visited by Michelle Obama Friday night, Saturday morning there in Beijing, and that's going to bring some visibility to what we're trying to do and shrinking the globe, bringing a broad education to the students that we do have.
That reminds me a little bit, too, of what's happening here in Iowa, where for decades we've been working program by program rather than trying to build an institutional presence or using broad paid advertising to get our name out. Instead, we're working to develop communities around specific programs. This began decades ago with the Iowa Writers Workshop when it developed very consciously an international writing program and invited some of the most promising developing writers from around the world to come to Iowa City. And in more recent years, we're seeing this happen around engineering and business and medicine and a whole host of other programs where essentially the word is spreading virally about the quality of the programs and the quality of life here in the heartland. So I don't think it necessary or even desirable to invest significant sums in building broad institutional awareness. Rather, the focus is to go with the programs that have the best promise and work through the established networks. As people return to their home countries, they have good things to say, and we're building the awareness really through the network.
Thank you. Shifting gears, student employees. So I think that we've all had opportunities to work with student employees, and their assistance can be invaluable in getting our work done. But one of the statements, so it's framed as a statement, but I'll hope to kind of make it into a question. The view that student interns alone can handle the university voice on Twitter is a dangerous one. Too much can go wrong. So my question for you, and I'll try to frame this again as a question, what role can we play as senior communicators in helping to guide that voice? So all social media, not just Twitter, but all the ways that we're using social media.
I think student employees are always a challenge. We run our social media with 18 student interns, and 2 full-time paid staff supervising those 18 interns. We give them assignments, and nothing gets posted without a review by the paid professional staff. So students can't just post to Twitter without it being seen. We have a schedule, and students are responsible for so many tweets a day or so many Facebook posts a week and coming up with ideas. But frankly, the students have the best ideas. They know what people want to see. They have very great story ideas, and their content tends to get more likes and more retweets than what we come up with ourselves. But it isn't unsupervised, and I wouldn't recommend that it be unsupervised. It requires editing.
So I would say when people who look like us wearing ties are talking about social media strategy, it's time to get the youngins in the room. Like Lisa, we have a small social media team of 2. We have 2 full-time people working on that, supervising a number of students and coordinating with others around the university. One of the ways that we sort of looked at that process was to make one of those full-time positions actually a social media fellow. And we purposely made it a 1-year appointment for a recent graduate who would work full-time, working very closely with our social media manager and with the students. So we have a little bit of a bridge in there. We have somebody who is close enough as a full-time employee, close enough to having been a student, but also has the responsibilities and the authorities of looking out for the institution. And we've made this as much a mentorship and education process and program as we have a production line for tweets and Facebook posts.
I'd like to tackle the question of what's the role of the senior communications leader in this question. And I think we have to be conscious and explicit as part of our core brand messages to make sure that people understand what the values and tone, voice, personality of that brand is. After all, many of our institutions are fairly similar. We offer degrees, we have people that do research, we engage with our communities and do service. But how we stand out often is the culture of the place. And I think we have an important role to play to bring that culture into focus, to make it explicit, and to guide our staff into letting the culture inform voice, tone, and personality.
Excellent. Thank you. Next question. There's a tension that exists on campus between public relations and marketing. How do you manage that difference? I see smiles.
Here, let me be provocative. There should be no tension. Okay. There should be no difference ultimately. The classic definition of marketing is that it's about identifying the customer's needs, and delivering a product or service satisfies the needs, and communicating in a way that facilitates that transaction. Classic definition of public relations is building trust and understanding so that the organization gains the goodwill that it needs. I think that we can really rise above and meld those 2 comments, or 2 approaches, and talk about the work that we're doing here together is designed to first build understanding and trust so that goodwill happens. And then second, it's to motivate the behaviors that we need. We need people to join us as students, faculty, staff. We need people to give to us. And we need people to speak well of us. And so under that bigger umbrella, we're all working towards the same ends. And we as the senior leaders should work to bring these into alignment and to not let the superficial differences confuse us. Public relations people are engaged with brand and use advertising, for example. As much as marketing folks should be doing research and strategic planning and thinking about trust as one of the outcomes that they engender. So I'd say let's rise above the labels and the superficial technical differences.
I would just, to Joe's excellent description, I would just add that I think in our institutions, in many cases, where the marketing and public relations really, the distinction doesn't exist. You know, there are services and programs for which we want some kind of action. We want somebody to come use our hospital services. We want to sell tickets to football games. We want to recruit students for an online program. And there's a long line of those things in which we would probably be using more of the classical marketing strategies and approaches. But the foundation for all of that is the reputation and the identity of the institution. And that's really, to the extent that we can put labels on these, that's really a public relations function. So as senior communicators, we're, I think, as much in the reputation management and the reputation enhancement and the reputation strengthening business as we are any of those sub-businesses like marketing or like public relations or like media relations or like social media. And that's our responsibility because our presidents and boards are going to be looking to us as the senior communicators to really make those distinctions understandable and to make them the best and the most effective use of the institution's resources.
I'd be curious as to how public relations and marketing are at odds on that particular campus. I can certainly see circumstances where their interests might not directly align, but you know, here we work together. It is about reputation management, exactly what Mike said, and I don't have somebody with marketing in their title on my team, but I do strategic communications in the title, and that person is responsible for keeping the institution on message. And he has become the go-to person for people all around the university, whether they do have the word marketing in their title or not. And we just recently met, for example, with athletics. And it was the athletics marketing team that wanted to make sure that their upcoming plans are not dissonant with our institutional messages, but that they're compatible and complementary. So whether it's officially marketing or officially PR, it's really about managing the consistency of the message. And then after that, it's really just terminology.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Okay, we have about 3 minutes left. So if you could maybe, each of you give me maybe 30 seconds as a final comment. Lisa, I'm going to start with you. I'm going to put you back on the hot seat.
Okay.
You're wearing red today. It was your fault.
Red is the Stanford color.
I got it.
I don't have a fancy background like the other guy. So we're low tech here at high tech Stanford. A parting comment, I think, you know, sometimes as a senior communicator, it can be, I think one of our greatest challenges is focusing on the big picture when we have lots of things coming at us all day. And I just want to encourage everybody out there that might be listening, for a senior communications leader, that our role is to keep our teams focused on that big picture and to give them priorities and to help them focus their own work. It's very easy to get scattershot in our world, and the issues management can eat us alive. And I would encourage you to take the time to step back and focus on those big picture priorities. And really, we've had great success in identifying a couple of messages a year based on the problems that we identify in that vast universe, and focusing our efforts on a couple of messages, and we're finding that that's going to help us be, with our limited resources, the most successful. And I just encourage you to not feel overwhelmed and pick those highest priorities.
Michael?
So I would first say that we have the best jobs on campus because we have a license to be involved in everything. Whatever it is, wherever it's happening, we have a license to be involved. Second, as senior communicators, we're responsible for everything that has our institution's name on it. We don't necessarily have the direct authority over it all day or every day, but we have to, the university community will be looking to us to provide the kind of leadership and clarity and direction that really has a huge implication for the future and the reputation of the university, and we need to use that that position wisely and judiciously, because it is a position of tremendous responsibility, even if the authority is not necessarily there.
Great. And Joe?
Invest in yourself. Take the time that you need to manage stress, take care of your health, connect with family and friends. These are the best jobs on campus. They're also among the most stressful and demanding jobs on campus. And many people look to us as a source of strength and vision and support when things are tough. So we've got to charge up our batteries. In fact, I commend everyone for taking an hour out of their day today to join Counselors of Higher Education, and thank my colleagues, Michael and Lisa and Dana, you and your technical team at the University of Michigan, because this is one of those ways that investing in yourself will help you grow and become stronger and more confident in your role.
Thank you. To wrap up, just a reminder that part 2 of this Google Hangout on Air will be held June 5th at 11 a.m. with the University of Michigan's Lisa Rudgers and Georgia Tech's Michael Warden. I want to make sure I get that D in there. We want to thank everyone for attending and participating today, and most of all our panelists. We also want to thank those behind the scenes who helped make today's event possible. A recording of this Hangout will be available on the PRSA website for team members. If you're not a member, perhaps you'll consider joining our network of senior communications professionals from across the nation. Membership information is available on the PRSA website. This concludes our broadcast. On behalf of the Public Relations Society of America, Counselors to Higher Education, say it one more time. On behalf of the Public Relations Society of America, Counselors to Higher Education section, I hope you have a wonderful day and a wonderful week. We'll see you next time.